Get started. That way we can give Mr. Wessel as much time as possible to get through some of these heavy topics. Hey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This meeting is being recorded.
Oh, good, you're recording it.
Mhm.
Okay.
And would you like me to call roll, Madam Chair?
Yes, please.
Okay, Chair McNulty.
Here.
Nate Reisner.
Here.
Vice Chair. Ann Dunno.
Here.
Paul Mood. It is noted that Paul Mood is not here. Jeff Bauman.
Here.
Jess McNeely.
Here.
Ruth Garcia.
Here.
Jeremy DeGator.
Here.
Romer Truly. It is noted that Romer is not here. Steph Santana. She would be the alternate. She's not here. Jason James not here. Kate Morley, Executive Director.
Present.
David Wessel.
Present.
Mandia Gonzalez is excused. Sandra Tavel, Transportation Planner. I am here. Kim Austin. Here. Corey Cooper.
Here.
Ty Holiday.
Present.
Aubrey Flores. Here. And it is noted that Paul has joined the meeting. Welcome, Paul. And Madam Chair, you may continue.
Of course, I got a phone call right before I start.
And Madam Chair, you can continue with the agenda.
All right. So we don't have anything on the consent or public comment.
I can confirm that there's no one online for public comment. Thank you.
Nothing on the consent agenda, so we're gonna move into general business.
Approval of minutes.
Oh, approval of minutes, thank you. Can I get a motion to approve the Technical Advisory Committee regular meeting minutes of September 25th, 2024?
I'll make a motion to approve the Technical Advisory Committee regular meeting minutes of September 25th, 2024.
Thank you.
Yep. I'll second.
Thank you, Jeff. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
I just have to decline and not vote because I wasn't here. Estella's no longer the TAC representative. And that was a September meeting, so I don't think that, just wanted to make note of that.
Thank you. I think we still have a form to approve them, so thank you, Ann. Okay, those are approved. General business, safe streets, master plan scope, Dave Wessel.
So, yeah, just a quick overview, catch you up with where we're at. So this is a master plan for the entire region. We'll break things out for the city and county. Has a safety focus because it's a Safe Streets and Roads for All grant of $2.14 million with a total project of cost of 2.7 roughly. The match is primarily from the city. And their city contribution is roughly split 55-45 cash to in kind, and then some minor contributions from the county and Mountain Line. The major components will be complete street guidelines, the master plan itself, engineering standards, code revisions, an interactive map tool, and then some project strategies. The federal grant agreement has been signed, and we are in the process of drafting the scope. Next slide, please. Some of the highlights of this grant agreement is based in an IGA with the city. It's based on a previously approved Transportation Alternatives IGA. I believe it is in process, scheduled to go before the city shortly, or in process of being scheduled. We have submitted a draft to Coconino County for their share. And Mountain Lines will be folded into a master IGA that we have with them. We have 5 years from the grant agreement to complete this. That was assigned in December 2024. So get comfortable with each other. We could get together for a long time on this one. And part of the IGA, we have 15% of the budget set aside as contingency as we work on scoping this out further. We'll decide the best way to set that aside. The IGA, as many IGAs do, holds the city responsible for overruns. And so this 15% contingency is one way of protecting the city against that. Another method that we'll employ is really looking at priority items and making sure those get the primary attention. We're not spending money on the lower priority items before we get those first ones done. MetroPlan will be administering the grant and the contract, co-project managing with Chris Fair. Welcome, Chris. Thank you for being here today. And the city, as I just said, will help project manage and track the budget. There's a large investment on behalf of the city, and we look forward to working with them to make sure their money is used wisely. They'll also oversee contract invoices, and you can see the value of their contribution there. Next slide, please. So really just wanted to give you an overview, a couple more comments. We interviewed about 31 people, most of you, many of you in this room, and putting the scope together. We have a draft scope that's out. A smaller group of us will be meeting this Friday morning to make our first run through that scope. That scope is really the internal document. We do need to flesh that out with deliverable things as we go to procurement and look to secure a consulting team. So happy to answer any questions at this point in time. Not seeing any.
Okay,
Thank you for your time.
thank you for that. Okay, quarterly TAC check-in.
Thank you. Next slide. So in 2023, shortly after I started with MetroPlan, I did a listening tour from a variety of people, including many TAC members. And one of the comments that came up at the time was that the way the TAC was structured was maybe not felt to be the most useful time for TAC members, because if you recall, the meeting occurred before every board meeting and went over the board agenda. And what I heard from TAC members was they wanted more time to dive deeper into projects and weren't always interested in things like the procurements we were doing, those types of things that end up on board agendas. So after discussion, we brought this to the TAC. The TAC decided to move to, we call them quarterly, but they don't actually space out quarterly, but 4 TAC meetings a year plus the advance was the decision that we made. We've done that for a year now. As you can see, they kind of are heavy in the spring because they're aligned with some particular requirements in the bylaws. The bylaws, what the TAC is responsible for up there in green, I'm not going to read it to you, but it aligns with reviewing our Title VI plan, our TIP, our budget, and our TIP, our Transportation Improvement Plan, and our UPWP, our Unified Planning Work Program. And so the cadence of the TAC meetings is now scheduled to align with those. And then we're trying to bring you other project updates at that time. And since we've been doing it for a year, we wanted to pause and check in and see if this was working for the TAC. I think there's one more slide if you advance again, Sandra. We wanted to check in and see if this was working for the TAC or if there was an alternate approach that you wanted to take. And I think the key items there are, do you feel informed in a timely manner of the things that you need to be informed of? Or would you like to be meeting more regularly? I think particularly around that fall break, which can feel very long. We just went through that, right? September to January. And there could be a variety of options, but key questions for you are up here. And I just wanted to open up the dialogue to see how people felt about continuing with what's planned or adding additional meetings back into the TAC calendar.
I like the way it's been so far. I think there's a lot of times where I've needed to talk with Sandra or any of your other staff and have been able to email them or work with them directly on grants or whatever. That wouldn't need to be done in a meeting.
Yeah.
I like the format that we have right now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'd say I'm comfortable with the format as well. And it seems like when we kind of went through this the first time, we said if there were things that came up, we could pull a quorum together and have a meeting. And I'm still open to that, especially during that long fall break. If something comes up, you need us,
Okay.
we'll figure it out.
I'm comfortable with the process too, with the quarterly, but I wonder if maybe as part of, could we get like maybe a monthly update? like kind of like the Friday happenings that maybe give a little more detail on where certain projects are. in
Like
the near
project
term?
report
Project- like a-
specifically for projects.
Yes,
Yeah, I think we,
kind of so we aren't getting it all every, just, all that information every 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to put more work on you, but
we have to do some reporting for our grants anyways, so yeah, I think we could look at the format we're using to report monthly on grants. They're pretty generic, but we could find some middle ground to give you a hint at what activities we've been doing over the past month. So I think that would be easy to add in.
I think that'd be helpful.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay, I think I'm hearing continue as is, but do a little bit more reporting out just through written format on specific projects, and I think we can do that. Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay. Moving on to item 3, strategic grants plan amendment. Sandra?
Thank you, Chair McNulty. So an overview of the strategic grants plan is that it's a roadmap to seek federal discretionary grants because of limited resources for the region. So the current plan is FY 25 to 27. It was adopted by our board last June, and it takes 14 projects across 7 fund sources and programs them for application for the next 3 years. Every year we update it as the old year falls off and the new year comes on. So I have updated the plan and I've changed it from I've updated it to add FY 28 and the old year falls off. I added clarification on non-federal grants because some of my team had some questions on foundation grants. This is a plan that deals with federal discretionary grants only. I added 2 new projects that I will get into later on in the presentation, West Route 66 Foots South and a vulnerable road user quick build. And again, I will talk about those in a minute. I changed an existing foots project to take all of the priority foots that are in the City of Flagstaff's active transportation master plan and made those one project to kind of do a planning grant seeking intervention. And Mountain Line project costs increased, no new projects added. However, I will be adding additional Mountain Line projects as a revision that I learned this afternoon, and Member Dunno is welcome to make comments. And I updated grant program application due dates. So for transportation alternatives, I added West Route 66 Foots South. So this would be a interim foots trail on Route 66 from Thompson to Woody Mountain that then makes room for future development of that segment. And we thought we would fund seek for it through the Transportation Alternatives Grant for planning monies. And that's that project.
And if I may just interject, we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Please do.
The West 66 update.
Thank you, Dave. So more information to come with the West Route 66 update. Thank you so much. And again, Transportation Alternatives is a grant that funds interventions that are non-vehicular. So the 2 other ones, the Vulnerable Users Quick Build and the Foots ATMP, I programmed the Quick Build for this year and the concept planning for the ATMP this year for Safe Streets and Roads for All. Does anybody have any questions about the VRU Quick Build? It's a small, depending on the outcomes of what VRU says, these would be small projects. Okay. Okay, so I wanted to talk about this. So the objective of the strategic grants plan is to mitigate competition among member agencies. And so as we checkerboard these projects against the grants, I am proposing, because if you look here, there's some competition, right, in FY 25. And I am suggesting a revision, and I welcome your feedback, to push out the quick build to FY 26 and push out some of the construction for certain foots trails for the Santa Fe Milton Bikeway to a later year, as opposed to putting some competition in there. So I welcome questions about that, about the revised timeline.
So to clarify, I think the action is to recommend approval, and the previous slide is what in your packet, but we're suggesting we modify those dates to what's
Yes.
on the other slide.
Thank you, Kate. So yes, do y'all want to discuss this suggested revision? And right now is the time to ask questions and recommend for adoption either as is or with the revised page. And then I know member Dunno has some additional project suggestions.
Can I ask a question about the foots builds? Can you clarify what the Santa Fe Foots Trail is? The only reason I'm asking is if it's the one that connects the tunnel from City Hall underneath the bridge where the Rio is going. Is that the section we're talking about? Is that the project that you're speaking of about?
May I recruit Chris Fair to answer your question because he knows more about the project.
Yeah, that is not the Santa Fe Foots extension.
Okay.
The Santa Fe Foots extension refers to existing Santa Fe, which is out north of the West Flagstaff neighborhoods. And there's nothing that brings it closer to town along the south side of the
Okay,
tracks.
so
That's
this
what
has
this.
nothing to do with the downtown mile. Okay, thank you. That's all.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Any other questions or concerns? Okay, so do we want to?
I'm trying to.
Excuse us for a moment. Testing, testing.
I know. I just had to get there. I couldn't see the screen, so sorry.
No, don't be sorry. You're good. Is everything okay now?
Yes.
Okay. So back to the agenda at hand. Do we want to adopt the plan with revisions that clarifies timelines for these two projects and adds additional mountain line projects?
Do you want me to kind of clarify?
Sure, I would love that. Thank you.
So if I'm understanding this document, it's really through 28, basically.
Correct.
So I believe when we talked, when I was kind of trying to cross-check from my prior colleague that was sitting in on TAC that had provided information earlier, we're working on our capital plan and I just was looking at what was showing here. And I think the only project that's in your timeline that's tracking to show in our capital plan that's not on here is the left turn off the Mesa. So right now, and I'm sorry if I get the name of the grant wrong, but MetroPlan has a grant to study.
Transportation alternatives.
Thank you.
Yes.
To study the left turn off the Mesa, and that's a feasibility study essentially. But what we were showing in our capital plan, which would ultimately ideally need grant funding, is the design and construction. So we had put, I think it was 500,000 for design, and I'm sorry, I'm going from memory. I'll have to clarify this later, if it in FY 27.
Yes.
And then we had an illustrative 5 million estimate for what potential construction would be. And of course, we'd hope the feasibility study would help inform what the potential cost would be. So we narrow that number down. But we are showing that on our capital plan. So and ideally it would be eligible for grants. Maybe above and beyond the standard grants that Mountain Line is typically the only competitor for, which is our 53, 37, and 39 grant. So wanted to put that in the mix. I think that was the key one. We have we have our bus storage project, which is a long-term that's outside your timeline. We have some other things, but I think everything else was close for what we're planning that for the purposes of this document. So.
Thank you for that context. And the reason, so Mountain Line has their own project ranking and scoring process that's pretty well formalized and institutionalized within Mountain Line. So the strategic grants plan has federal discretionary grants programmed for the other members, and then Mountain Line has their own special section. And because of project timelines, updated capital improvement programs, and some staffing changes, that's why Mountain Line's projects aren't quite current, but they will be with a revision. So I guess I'm asking for the TAC today to recommend adoption of the existing plan as is or with revisions, given the timeline for the slide that's up right now and for Mountain Line's updated projects as Ann just stated them.
For the SS4A, this would be, MetroPlan's priority list, And then you'd be helping out with your first priority, right?
Yeah.
I'd be willing to take the county's project off of the first priority because I've got the staff to be able to put that grant application together. If you wanted to move one of the other ones up that may not have the staff to be able to put that application together.
Oh, thanks. So you want to save the bus for a later year, the bus stops planning?
No, I'll still put together, a application for it, but instead of having MetroPlan, put together the application, I'll put together the application for it. The county staff will do that.
Oh, I appreciate that so much. And we can certainly talk more because I can definitely, let's talk more, like, because I want to help you. This is a strategy, but also like, MetroPlan's assistance ranges from collecting support letters to strategizing to writing actual narrative so we can talk about the different pieces, but I really appreciate that. Thank you.
And the other piece I'll say is this helps us so that we're not all competing against each other and we can be more strategic. So even if you don't need a lot of our help on the grant writing, it's nice to have it there so we know we're not making 4 applications in competition with you.
Thanks, Kate. So, Madam Chair, would you like to offer making a motion to adopt a revised strategic grants plan?
Can I actually make the motion then?
Or ask for the motion?
Can I,
again?
would someone like to make a motion to approve to consider recommendation to the executive board to adopt the amended plan as revised?
I'll make a motion to recommend that the executive board adopt the fiscal year 25 to 28 strategic grant plan update.
You say revised.
Revised.
As revised.
As revised.
Okay.
Of course.
Can I get a second? Okay, is there any, okay, can I get a second?
I'll second, and I do have a question.
Okay,
We can ask for
discussion.
discussion.
Yeah, any discussion?
I understand the project, the Mountain Lion project, but I don't understand which TAC that's going in.
The Mountain Line project,
SS4A?
I don't know yet because when the strategic grants plan that was in your packet is organized with all the member agencies and then Mountain Line has their own section. And so as Member Dunno stated, I have to look at these 2 projects to see if they fit in the other discretionary grants because the Mountain Line section just has 5339, 5310, all of the FTA eligible grants programmed. So I can't quite answer your question in this moment, but I can definitely get back to you.
Yeah, that's why I didn't understand where it was going because you haven't made that determination yet. You're just saying we'd like to put it into one of these categories that's not a typical transit tracking now. Thank you.
That's exactly right. Thank you for restating that.
This wasn't tracking.
No. That helps me too. I'm so serious. Thank you.
Been discussing.
You're done discussing, okay. Any other discussion, questions, clarifications? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes. Thank you. And P2P project scoring, Sandra?
Thank you, Chair McNulty. So I am going to pass out some hard copy scoring rubric and project list. So the P2P process is called planning to programming, and it is a precursor to potentially fund projects on the ADOT roadway system in our region. What is interesting about Flagstaff is that our core roadway systems are made up of ADOT roadways. So we are looking to prioritize projects on the ADOT roadway system in a strategic way to give them a better chance of getting funded through ADOT's 5-year construction program. So we want you to review and weigh in on this project list in preparation for the strategic advance, where we will order 5 projects in order of importance. Our project selection timeline. This fall, we decided that through collaboration with ADOT, thank you so much, ADOT, is that we took a list and we called it of these P2P projects. And we took the fall and the winter to really get clear on some kind of list and devise a scoring rubric. And then we are here today to weigh in on the existing projects that have been scored with the rubric that we created. So we created a scoring rubric that focuses on, is the project cited in a local plan? Safety metrics, is it identified in a local safety plan? Is it identified as a safety solution inside a safety plan? Does it support economic vitality and community character and social connection? Is it located in equity areas? And does it support the natural environment, specifically through wildlife linkages or dark skies? So you have two handouts. Here is the scoring rubric that I just talked about, where we scored the projects. This is the rubric that we use to score projects. So there were about 100 projects. We applied the scoring rubric. We actually first, before applying the scoring rubric, we removed duplicates in projects that are already funded. And then we culled that list of 57. We scored those 57 projects. And the most points a project could score is 15. And so I cut it off, 14 projects rose to the top, and I cut it off at 10. So this spreadsheet that you have in front of you is any project that scored 10 or higher based on the rubric. 11 out of 14 projects were bike, ped, and nature. The top scoring projects from 12 to 14 points. So these are in order of how they scored. So add crossings on 89, Fanning, Lockett, Steves, Arrowhead, 14 points. State Route 40, which is Route 66, new ADA ramps, pedestrian refuge. US 89 Milton and Reardon intersection improvements. US 89 bike ped safety, curb extensions, ped ramps, Beacon. State Route 40, Route 66, add crossings at Schweitzer and Milton. Then US 180 corridor wide improvements. It's part of a big corridor study that scored 12 points. The remaining projects scored 10 to 12 points. And this is what we're going to be scoring. Oh, this is what we're going to be picking our top 5 at the advance. So again, 10 to 12 points. State Route 89, Milton Road spot improvements, high visibility crosswalks, 88 ramps, pedestrian staging. State Route 40, Route 66, Ponderosa, pedestrian separated crossings. Route 66 West, leg pedestrian improvements. I-40, California state line to junction I-17, rehabilitating the shoulders. US 89, Milton and Starbucks, pedestrian separated crossings. I-40, retrofitting with wildlife fencing, escape ramps, and signage. And lastly, US 89, First Milton Plaza Way, pedestrian crossing improvements. And lastly, Sunset Crater safety improvements. So, my points are off. Sorry about that. But yeah, these are the top scoring 14 projects. So we are asking you today, a final ask, are there projects that you see missing from the 14? Are there possibly technical errors in ranking? I think I just found one. Making sure your project is on the list. Are you like, hey, where's this project? And then our goal is to prioritize at the advance through a workshop session, picking our top 5 in order of importance for nomination into the P2P process for fiscal years 27 through 31.
It's for modernization projects, right?
Yes, thank you for saying that. So modernization is the best category in which like these majority bike ped projects would fit in.
How much funding do they not have a year for modernization projects?
Jeremy, not enough to fund everything.
How many?
I mean, as you know, 80% of our monies go to the pavement preservation category at this point. As far as the exact dollar figure, I don't.
Has the ADOT North Central District got any modernization projects since the P2P process has been implemented?
You might answer that better than I could.
There was none when I was there.
I think you got the dark skylights for modernization, right?
Was that through the P2P process?
I think it was.
We've had a couple we haven't gotten notice on this current cycle is going to relate to, but our highest scoring projects for modernization. So.
Yeah, the Elk Crossings were highest scoring ones. Those weren't funded through P2P. They're in the modernization. Those were funded through other grants. Those were, I think, the top 10 in the state.
But again, as you kind of touched on, Obviously, this is the MetroPlan process to identify these projects, ADOT, just North Central District's modernization list is 400+ projects. So we're only looking at a small portion of those right now. The intent obviously is to work through this process and to help inform district management when it comes time to prioritizing, because district support for whatever gets prioritized here is going to be key for these to rank well statewide, because these are going to compete against the rest of the state as well.
Thank you for saying that, because we're trying to maximize resources knowing that we have limited funding, which is why we want to apply some kind of strategy to nominating these projects. So thank you both. Any questions or glaring missing projects on the list? We're coming to you for your expertise to weigh in as our advisors. These were in your packet, and this information, the projects are the same. The ranking looks a little bit different because I had to reconcile the details. So this is an iterative process. I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Is this something that people could kind of take and digest and provide feedback by the end of the week, if maybe that's?
If you're raising that, yes, end of the week. So the goal, so let's work backward here. The goal is in May of 2025, ADOT is going to put out a call for projects for the P2P nomination process, at which in a perfect world, we would have our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 top 5 projects to nominate that we all chose and agreed on to nominate into that process in May of 2025. Our strategic advance, which you're all invited to, is taking place on February 11th, where we're workshopping these 14 projects to pick 5 most important ones in order of importance. So if y'all think you can give me feedback before the advance, if you want a week, that would be January 29th. To get back to me over any missing projects. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, it seemed like people were taking a minute to digest this, and I just wondered.
Yeah, and you don't want to use it. That's a great suggestion. Kate, how do you feel about it?
What's your printing timeline?
My printing timeline is February 3rd.
That would be.
So, yes.
If I might make a suggestion to Sandra and see if you think this would help. So first, I would, part of this discussion is the rubric. Does a rubric make sense? So don't just necessarily go straight to the projects. Does a rubric make sense? Because that's what resulted in the projects. And then the suggestion maybe to Sandra is, can we see a more complete list of projects so you can see what didn't make the list? And that kind of gives you a sense of, is this rubric making sense, or if we see other prioritization that comes to play? Just kind of give you a sense of that.
I think the full list was in the packet, but I have to make sure.
And all these projects are currently on ADOT's P2P list?
Yes, it was a list that Jeremy and I started with 120 projects that we culled, removed duplicates, removed already funded projects. But the short answer is yes. And I want to see if I did include these in the packet.
Well, Sandra looks, I think a key point here is it's likely we're going to get maybe one project. 5 is probably not going to happen, right? So that's why we want to order them. So I think as you're thinking through projects that you want to see done on the ADOT system in the MetroPlan region, now is the time to make sure that that project is making it to the advance. Because if it doesn't show up at the advance, it's not going to get prioritized. So this conversation is really, if you had to pick one project, please make sure we have it in our list so that way it can be considered in that prioritization.
Quick question, Madam Chair. How does the West Route 66 corridor planning and crossings and all that play into this? Is it on this list or?
Certain aspects of it are, yes. And the extended list of projects beyond these 14 were not included in your packet. So sorry about that. I can certainly give those to you in your week of review that you requested. Thanks, Dave. Question for the group. So y'all, Chair McNulty suggested that y'all take a week to review and suggest any missing projects. Dave brought up the scoring rubric issue. Did you also want to look at the scoring rubric? Because Dave brought it up, so I figured I would put that up.
By that, you mean these 4 categories?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this scoring rubric is by the sieve that I use to cull and come up with these 14 projects.
If I may, I wouldn't worry too much about the scoring rubric. The scoring rubric was designed based on the transportation values that MetroPlan adopted. So that's where they came from. Safety, if you remember, it's at the beginning of our PowerPoint in a circle because there weren't priorities. So we did our best without having a lot of technical, we didn't have a lot of ability to get deep into technical weeds, right? So a lot of it was, is it in a plan? Is it in a safety plan? What are things that, is it about light, you know, how are we gonna score natural environment, lighting and wildlife processing? So we did our best. I think over the years, we were able to refine the rubric. I think under the current timeline, I'm not sure that we have the ability to go rescore or make them much more complex. But what we are doing is we're inviting this portion of the process to bring subjectivity to the table. And so the scoring is one thing for you to help inform you in your decision-making about what priorities might look like, but we're not beholden to the scoring, and people can, as we're asking right now, is there a project that didn't score high that should be on the list that we should bring to the advance? And then the advance, you know, if people want to pick the lowest ranking project as the number 1, that's fine. That's the point of bringing a technical group together. So the rubric is really just meant to give you background information if you're trying to figure out what your priorities should be or how you might want to rank something, but it is not the final say. And so I wouldn't worry too much about it. And we will take feedback for sure about how we can improve the process for next year and make it better.
Thank you, Kate.
So, I guess, does everybody need a little more time, or has everybody looked through it and we can give a thumbs up that this is?
Well, you can still have a week to look at the project
Okay.
if that is useful to you. So
Yeah, that's right.
if y'all feel well enough acquainted and you're like, yeah, slam dunk, this and that, great.
Yeah.
But if you want a week, please take it. So can I see a show of hands who wants a week to look at this?
I'm kind of, well, just have to figure out the namings and what crossings and. Is it helpful?
Right, because Anne's replacing Estella, so she hasn't been along for the ride. So Anne and Michelle. I'm not sure how to call the decision if only 2 out of however many members.
This is just an informational item, so I think it's just letting us know that
Oh, okay.
we have a week to get back with you. with
Okay.
anything. And if we fail to, then we lost our opportunity.
Then you don't get your project.
Yeah,
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
yeah, thank you.
Okay.
And I do like Dave's suggestion. It sounds like we have a full list in our packet, so if
You don't, I'll email it to you. I'm so sorry. I only emailed you the one that's 4. Okay. I'm happy to email
Thank you.
y'all the full list.
Yeah,
Yeah, that'd be fun to look at.
I will do that.
thank you.
After this meeting.
Good idea.
Good job.
Thank you, Chair.
I'm curious, but didn't make the list.
Okay, moving on to item 5, vulnerable road user safety action plan update. Dave Wessel playing the part of Mandia Gonzalez.
All righty then. I think this, as we hearken back to the comments on TAC schedule versus planning advisory group and dumping a lot of information on you all at once, you may reflect on that a bit as we go through this presentation. So quick reminder of our purpose here. We're looking at safety related work done, advising and educating our partners on particularly vulnerable road user safety issues, doing a safety analysis and safety performance measures, and looking at new policies, and then next steps that we can take in terms of those strategies and policies. And that italic bold statement at the bottom, establish our commitment to Vision Zero. This will be part of the advance coming up that's been mentioned. And I think most of us are familiar with Vision Zero, but you can see it on the right encapsulated there. And it's basically trying to take traffic fatalities and injuries down to 0. It's a safe systems approach. Bless you. Next slide, please. So how will this plan be used? In a variety of ways. identifying locations and informing our partners of those where VRUs are at risk, looking at those countermeasures. A number of those have been identified in a variety of plans, but we're really trying to consolidate and emphasize some of those. Working these measures into our transportation demand management, safe route to school programming. And I think was referenced in the SGP discussion, this quick build idea. Yes, there's going to be some larger capital projects that have to do with safety, but this VRU study is really looking at some of these more quick build, maybe demonstration projects that we can implement. You can see the other opportunities there, including prioritization and grant funding. Next slide, please. So the schedule remains the same. We are on schedule. We hope to complete most of the work by June. I will say that we have asked for an extension for kind of grant administration reasons from FHWA. It will take us to the end of the year, and we'll take advantage of that time to refine implementation strategies with our members, and to, if needed, clean up. We've got this task of consolidating a number of planning documents that are out there. This VRU study, its predecessor, the Regional Transportation Safety Plan, the ATMP was transmogrified into a safety action plan, and ADOT's done its 3 or 4 studies. We're going to try to unify those into a single document. That might take a little creative editing. Next slide, please. So an overview of some crash findings, and I'm going to channel Mandy through her notes here. So looking at crashes over a 7-year period, data provided by ADOT. So you can see the number of crashes there, some 35 fatalities between peds and bikes. And really when pedestrians or bicyclists are in a crash, they're more likely to end in an injury or fatality. Next slide, please. From these graphs, you can see total crashes are increasing. There was a spike in fatalities at the top right in 2021, kind of the last year of COVID. Numbers are pretty small. I mean, I don't want to diminish the tragedy there, but spikes can be significant, but not in percentage wise. But I do think we see a slight upward trend through those. The bottom left, and you can see kind of that volatility there in the pedestrian and bicycle crashes, with bikes coming down a bit in the last year, but pretty significant increase in pedestrian crashes. And I'll just say that it is literally a matter of inches for ped and bike crashes, whether it's serious or not. So next slide, please. This is just some demographic data, who's involved in these crashes, largely young males. I think the relevance of this really, how will this be used? We hope to have education campaigns, and this would be a target audience for safe behaviors, safety education, things like that. Next slide, please. So where they're happening, you can see the distribution, kind of a strong cluster in the downtown along Milton, and then up in the 4th Street Sunnyside area. If you look at the fatalities on pedestrians, somebody tell me, it's Red Square, I believe. Good cluster, bad cluster. In that kind of top right in the 89 Country Club intersection area. So, this kind of data will help us, prioritize locations, as well as, certain crash modification factors deal more with fatalities and injuries as opposed to just general crashes. So next slide, please. A lot of these are happening at intersections. You can see the types of intersections, marked crosswalks, 36%. Yeah, intersection not in a crosswalk, another 88%. So we've got, almost half of that group there involved at a intersection. The results of hit and run, so enforcement and other issues may come into play. And then, we've had lots of conversations in this community about what types of bike lanes we ought to build. And we're seeing that 10% of those crashes are happening there. So next slide, please. So crossing the road, and I'm gonna have to hold this up on my screen so I can actually see it. The functional classification, major collectors are showing up. That's the long line. Oops, am I in the right slide? There we go. Sorry. Crossing the road, you can see is the most significant action there, followed by going straight ahead, pretty significant. In terms of violations resulting in a serious injury or fatality, in order, one is no improper action. So there may be an opportunity for education there on police officers as well as the pedestrians and bicyclists in terms of reporting crashes. Did not use crosswalks, and then failed to yield right of way are really the most significant. So next slide, please. Roadway classification. You can see major collectors pretty heavily involved, but also our arterials, that's major and minor. If you looked at those two together, pretty hefty part of our crashes. And, thinking about our major and minor arterials, ADOT roadways, as we were talking about earlier, are our major arterials, but they often have the same characteristics, 5 lanes, about the same traffic levels as our minor arterials, which are mostly the city facilities. So those types of streets are really in combination the most significant contributor, and we'll talk about factors here shortly. The serious and fatal crashes by speed. I should know if this is in the slide deck, maybe it is, but the chances of surviving a crash, when you're a ped or a cyclist, go way down after 25 miles an hour. They drop precipitously. And so you can see that 30, 35, 40 miles an hour is where we have most of our roadways. It drops, for the 40, 45, 50, 55, we just don't have that many roadways outside the interstates that move at those speeds. Next slide, please. So this is the high crash network for VRUs. Ty, can I defer to you on this? You put together this map. Can you explain a little bit more of what we're seeing here?
Sure. So this is a more simplistic representation of what I'll dive into a little bit later, which is a more comprehensive version of this map. But this essentially just takes the location of crashes involving VRUs and appends them to roadways in our region, kind of similar to NACOG's high injury network that they developed just in relation to vehicles. But this is specifically focused on vulnerable road users. So you can see just a couple of key roads stick out there, specifically the Milton corridor, the Butler corridor, and the East 66 corridor. You'll see a map that's a little bit more detailed than this one in later, but this was kind of our early look at vulnerable road user crashes in our region.
Sorry, thank you. So here's some of the key findings in terms of that high injury network. You can see the total number of crashes. My understanding, and these are total crashes, not fatal and serious injuries.
Yes.
That's on the far right. So as Ty just mentioned, Milton, East Route 66, and Woodlands primarily for pedestrians, and Milton and East Route 66 also for bikes, but Butler Avenue. Next slide, please. And then here's another look at that in terms of breaking it down by moderate, severe, and fatal injuries. And those totals on the far right, looking at peds and bikes, you can see our kind of top locations in terms of intersections. So Milton, Woodlands Village, Butler, and a couple locations, San Francisco Fever, and then kind of what we saw on the map, North Fourth and West Route 66, Milton. Go ahead. Next slide. We had a presentation from ADOT on their rail study. We're incorporating much of that into this study. I think part of the findings, if I recall, that the rail crashes were not at intersections necessarily. They were along, many of them were off of the crossings. Next slide. Quick overview of some of the outreach that's been done. Reached over 400 participants between April and January of this year. Earth Day, Bike Bazaar, Science in the Park, Family Food Center, Coordinated Mobility Council, Senior Center, and other locations. Some of the activities were asking people's inputs on safer roads, fun exercise about cone of vision. Basically, you're at slow speed, you have a wide cone of vision and you tend to focus. And they had a fun little cone that you actually got to look through and see what you could see. Some walk audits conducted by Kim, and then some other activities there. Next slide. So where are we headed? How are we learning what we've used? The crash data was used to inform some of the outreach and gain, the outreach was also added qualitative data into our study. We're then defining action areas, and then we'll come eventually with policies and project recommendations. So next slide. And some of the action areas that have been identified and will be fleshed out as we go. And these, I believe, align with a safe systems approach to some degree. So reducing potential conflicts, slowing vehicle speeds, encouraging safer practices, improving data collection and analysis, and support on commitment to Vision Zero. Some of our partners have committed to Vision Zero or variations of that, and we want to work with them to help that achieve that. And as mentioned earlier, this kind of quick action, we're looking to put these into 2 and 5 year timeframes, and also kind of fold this into the larger context, as I said, with some of these larger capital projects. Next slide, please.
All right.
Turn this over to Ty.
Thank you, Dave. And I think I know most of you, but for those of you who don't, I'm Ty Holliday. I'm a Montoya Fellow with MetroPlan and Mountain Line. With MetroPlan, I do quite a lot of the GIS analysis. And so I'll be going over some of the new spatial data sets that have been incorporated as a result of this VRU process. So Dave kind of overviewed a lot of the data sources that we looked over. And so I was also tasked with kind of putting them all together, and essentially I'll go over a little bit later the risk exposure assessment. But first I want to just start with, pull this up here. The first one is the consolidation of safety projects in our region, and the second one is the risk exposure assessment. So, okay. So this is the prioritizing and bundling of safety projects. We've recently got ArcGIS here at MetroPlan, which is great. Allows us to bring all of our maps into one space and analyze our data a lot easier. So the intent of this map, and I can pull up the the actual web map if desired. But the intent of this map is to basically consolidate all of the existing safety projects that have been looked at in the last 5 years. These project recommendations have come from the Regional Transportation Safety Plan, Mountain Line's pedestrian crossing study, and several of ADOT's planning efforts, such as the Active Transportation Safety Action Plan, Milton Bike Ped Road Safety Assessment, and the Rail Crossing Plan. Also going back to what Sandra talked about a little bit earlier, it captures our priorities as part of the strategic grants process and projects that are already funded with both infrastructure and planning. So how are we actually planning on using this? It's related to the VRU results, which should be coming relatively soon. There are many existing safety recommendations, so using findings from this VRU to help prioritize projects and review existing recommendations to ensure proposed countermeasures are good for the crash types that are happening in our region. This also gives us a great opportunity to partner when projects are funded. Could we find ways to bundle projects so we could see change happen more timely? And maybe there are chances to bundle projects in a holistic way to support future grant opportunities. Also help support grant applications, and finally supports prioritizing projects through other methods such as the P2P process that we talked about earlier. As noted, this is in draft form. You might see that big green square there. That's not actually a solid big green square. It's just an overlay region. But we're going to consider it a living document so we can continue to refine it as we need. So that's our first interactive tool. Our second one is the risk exposure assessment, and I'll go over this a little bit. This has essentially been my bread and butter for the last few months. The purpose of it is to really look at and know our safety risks related to the design and geometry of the roadways. See what can kind of predict or what has a influence on exposure to a crash. Determine if higher risk impact disadvantaged communities, score roadways to further prioritize projects. And really, this is meant to be a proactive tool, not a reactive tool. So think of it more of almost as a predictive risk measure. So it's not necessarily where the crashes are happening, but the attributes from the roadways that have a lot of crashes and roadways in our region that share those similar attributes. So before we dig into the risk exposure process, it's good to have to kind of know what risk factors and exposure are, and my slide didn't change. So risk factor is a characteristic or behavior that increases the likelihood of a negative outcome. So in this case, it's the physical design of the roadway. So the number of through lanes, etc. Exposure is the condition of being exposed to something. So vulnerable road users are exposed to risk factors, the road attributes. This is also going to be an ongoing tool. So as new data sets come online, we'll be also integrating and updating this as roadways change and we get new intersections or these great new projects that are coming online. It'll also be reflected in this tool. So in order to put this together, we did a very comprehensive combination of pretty much every organization's here's data sets, including ADOT, City of Flagstaff, MetroPlan, county data sets. We used crash data from ADOT, and we essentially combined all the different attributes of the roadway. So you can see up here, through lanes, median type, the presence of left turn lanes, the presence of parking, all these different factors. What you're seeing here on the right-hand side is when we actually combined all of these and then overlaid crashes onto them. And then we basically scored them. So we scored the percentage of length of roadway in our region by the percent of crashes in our region that happened on those roadways. And these were broken down to very small pieces. So you'll see in the map, it's not an entire four mile section. We're actually looking at hundreds of feet where these attributes actually are. So it's pretty precise. These are the ones that rose to the top. And so we then took these in ArcGIS Pro, and then we analyzed these factors that are predictive to VRU crashes in our region.
There's a little delay.
I know, there's like a delay. Anyways, great. So you can see on the left-hand side here, we essentially took that table that I presented in the last slide and spent a lot of time, had discussions with staff. We also had discussions with Chris and Martin and I believe Carlton from the city to kind of fine tune our risk scores and kind of think about the ways we would actually score these. So we took the factors and we came up with a point system. Right now, well, it's currently through lanes, right turn, left turn, bike facility width, median type, speed limit, vehicle volume, and then we have what's called an equity area. This was taken from ADOT's equity. I forget exactly the data set.
Mashup.
Yeah, it was basically a mashup. We kind of scored that as a yes, no. And so there's 12 points possible, and you can see on the map on the right-hand side, these are the roads in our region that have the highest risk score based on all of these factors. So I'll just pause there for a second. But this risk exposure isn't actually just our creation. We actually modeled this after a different metropolitan planning org's system that was also sponsored by a Safe Streets for All grant. So this isn't like a first time deal. But there have been other Safe Streets for All grants that have funded tools to refine project recommendations and prioritize with VRUs in mind. Again, this is going to be an ongoing tool. And like I said earlier, it'll also support our planning processes such as the P2P. So.
While you're all digesting that map and driving around the region in your mind, a couple things. One, I want to really commend Ty for his analytical work as well as cartography. He makes really nice looking maps. We spent a lot of time talking about, I think I've got the right statistical term, collinearity, where, we would see two things, like, oh, it's 6 lanes and a median. Oh, medians are causing crashes? Like, no, let's look at the research and dig into that. And so we tried to clean those things up. Where this tool comes in well is, correct me if I'm wrong, but you can click on one of these segments and you can see what contributes to the score on any one of those. And so now as you're looking to come up with a solution, you can say, well, what am I trying to modify, or what can I possibly modify within this given segment? It also allows us to, see some of those systemic effects that we, might be able to bring a more widespread solution instead of just a one-off solution. So, and then the last thing I'll say is one of the differences in this map compared to the one he referenced is this one is focused on VRU. This can be expanded to create something similar for all crashes in the region, or maybe just vehicular crashes in the region, to gain those insights. So, just again, thank you, Ty, for the good work.
Thanks for putting that so well, Dave. And yeah, absolutely. That list of different scores with the fun, red to orange, we talked a lot and had a lot of discussions about how we were actually going to score them. So that risk score graph is the closest we've got. But I did want to give you guys just a little look. I'm sorry for Ruth online. I don't know if you can see the web map. And if you would like to see this map, I'm happy to share it.
Watching time.
So.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, I'll just show a road, for instance, so I'll just click here on 4th Street. And we can see all the factors that contribute to it. So this is a minor arterial with 5 through lanes with a speed limit of 30 miles per hour, 2-way left turn lanes, does have bike lanes, sidewalk, parking. And so you can see all these different factors. We didn't analyze, or we didn't end up using all of them in the final score, but we did analyze pretty much every attribute of the roadway that we could. So if you're interested in this data set, I'd be happy to share that. So
There was like 20 that rose to the top out of 62 things. And of those 62, it's like there's a high, medium, and low of density. And so at density, I think all of the density ones fell off, didn't really look significant, but that this is good work. I think there's a lot of value to it.
And if there's any questions or comments, I'd love to hear them. Other than that, that's essentially.
Question, what was the most typical thing that you saw the risk score go up for vulnerable road users?
I think the most substantial factor was through lanes.
Now go back to your table.
Sure. This one? Oh, my PowerPoint is all over. This
That
one? Yeah, so through lanes rose to the top, both 5 and 6 through lanes were very significant. You can see that spread there between median type and through lanes. But those were pretty significant. And you can even see through lanes pops up, I believe, 4 times in the top 20 that we have here. So that was a pretty significant factor, and it was also scored. If I go to the
What's the
table,
first blue highlighted column that says percent of, and then it's like,
Oh.
you know,
percent of length of the roadway. So that's the total length of those roads in our region.
So it's basically crashes per mile of that factor. It's the way it was, the percent of crashes over the percent of length that factor represented. So come up with that.
35 with speeds on 30 to 40 miles an hour.
Yes.
The vulnerable road user crashes really spiked up there.
Am I reading that correctly, that without the presence of parking, there's a higher incidence? It seems like, and with parking on one side, it goes down.
So this was another conversation that we ended up having about collinearity. Dave and I looked at this and we determined that one side parking also tends to occur on collectors.
So it's more about okay,
Right, so
thank you.
this was one that we ended up ruling out in our final score as just a collinear. So this table is actually more accurate to the factors that are really influencing.
Okay.
This was just our first look at all those factors, and then we kind of had conversations about which ones would actually rise to the top.
Thank you.
And Madam Chair, that is all on the VRU.
Well,
That's all.
thank you, guys. That was a great presentation.
Thank you.
All right. Unified Planning Work Program update, Kate?
Thank you. So the Unified Planning Work Program is a federally required document that outlines the activities MetroPlan intends to do with its federal funding. It's done in a 2-year cycle. Both ADOT and FHWA review the document and then approve the document. And when we deviate from the document, we have to go make amendments to do that, to be able to spend the funds that way. So it is largely aligned with our budget. And so the timing of this is good because we are starting to work on our FY26 budget, which seems crazy. But we also do our FY27 budget, a pretty good draft of that at the same time because of the 2-year cycle. Next slide. So there's a bunch of things on here, but I'm going to talk through high level. So the grants that you see at the top are all acronyms for different things, planning, surface transportation block grants, etc. These are the typical funds that MetroPlan gets in formula programs. So we're not competing for these funds. It's kind of our bread and butter of how we are sustained. And so the activities that you see under it are, some are federally required. We have to do a TIP. We have to do a Title VI plan, a public participation plan. So we use that bread and butter funding to do a lot of those federal requirements. But then we also have the option to do some additional items through it. And so the special projects that you see on the right side of the screen indicate some of those activities. What I think you'll find as a theme in our draft of the UPWP right now is we have a lot of things underway and we're not proposing a lot of new things at this point. It's like we got to wrap up some of the things we're working on, and then we'll move on in the future. So that's a high level of that. We also then have a series of transit planning grants, and I didn't put all those up there, but they typically have numbers, 5305 something. And we have a lot of things we collaborate with Mountain Line on for that, and we typically defer to Mountain Line in the competitive programs for these. So we have some formula funds, then there's some competitive, and we typically will defer to what planning, they're all planning activities. So what planning activities does Mountain Line want to do? we have to be the applicant for those grants, so we partner with them on the delivery of those programs. We've partnered with the city on some of them, like the Transit into Code study. We've got a couple subrecipient agreements with the city to help fund some additional work there. So all of the applications that you see on there have actually been submitted or awarded at this point. Some of them are still pending, but they're all in progress and hopefully get awarded here soon. Next slide. The carbon reduction program. If I had to pick one program that is not going to last the next couple of years, I would pick the carbon reduction program.
Green,
Yeah.
Green New Deal.
The Green New Deal. So what are we doing with this money? This is kind of a continuation. The Safer People campaign, you guys will hopefully see soon. I hope you are entertained by it. We've got some commercials coming out and videos about how to use infrastructure around town. I think they're doing a very good job. That's a clip from one of the videos, that's still of the video that you can see there. Chris just left, but Chris and Kim are the stars of the Safer People campaign.
Chris is cyclist 3 and I'm cyclist 2.
We're excited about the things we're seeing the consultant develop, and I feel like every day somebody's got a new idea of a different message we need to put out to the public about how to use a piece of infrastructure or, make room for bikes, those kinds of things. So I think continuing as long as we can to support the Safer People campaign is of interest. It's also aligned with the Safer Systems approach. And then one of the strategies that you saw in the VRU was about educating people. So that's a piece of it. We're also using the CRP money right now for data collection because we're doing multimodal data counts, and our model is a multimodal model. So we're using CRP money to fund some of those things that would typically come out of that first bucket of money, kind of our bread and butter grants. Next slide. Discretionary programs. We've got a number of things underway. We're just really continuing along that path right now, not proposing anything new. The Vulnerable Roadway Users Plan, you just heard an update on. The Safe Streets Master Plan, you also heard an update on. And then our other big project right now is our Safe Routes to School Transportation Alternatives Award, where we're doing part of that in collaboration with the city and Mountain Line for infrastructure projects. Corey is leading that effort for us. And then also the programs that Corey is delivering as well. So Corey's been doing a lot of background research, talking to school districts, observing activities at schools. And so we'll put together a plan and recommendations for how schools might be able to address some of those congestion issues that they're having in the mornings. Next slide. So that's it. It's like I said, it's really the proposal right now is a continuation of the things we already have underway rather than a lot of new things. But now would also be the time to hear from TAC members if there's something that you want us to undertake in the next couple of years and lead. It's a good time for us just to try to work those things into the budget and the UPWP. And if you have projects that you're planning to work on that you would like our assistance on, now is also a good time to let us know we're planning something and could really use your help collaborating. And that will help us work that into our work program and see if we need funding to help support those activities or to identify that activity to ADOT and federal highways so that they know how we're funds, which includes our staff time. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions on the UPWP. And this will take us through the budget cycle really to finalize. So if you do have ideas over the next month or so, let me know.
Thank you for that presentation. I'm going to move on to the West 66 operational assessment update. Dave.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and this is just that, an update. So just kind of setting it up, reminding you what we're doing. Really our objective is to help identify projects in which to spend City Proposition 419 funds, which have been dedicated to West 66. To do that, we want to establish a reasonable and mutually agreeable corridor solution for which the projects are compatible, and that those solutions should be compliant with ADOT. Primarily, it's an ADOT highway and city policy, and they should meet, these mutually agreed to priorities, budgetary constraints, standards, city standards where appropriate, and allow for future growth and expansion. Next slide.
Sorry.
It's coming. There we go. Punchline for now. This is an update. We're still working through this. But as we look at it, widening to 4 lanes all the way to Woody Mountain with separated bike lanes may best meet scope and criteria expectations. That said, strategic phasing may address immediate active transportation needs and allow for expansion to meet those future mobility needs. There are actions outside of the scope, and we'll tell you a little bit more about what those are and how we got there. That may allow more a future response that's more aligned with the full range of city policy expectations. And those expectations include the carbon neutrality plan, active transportation master plan, both things that have come online since the 2018 vote that put in the 419 funds. And so these things will be connectivity regulations, maybe some right-of-way acquisition policies and strategies. Many of those practices have been exercised, but I don't think they're enumerated very well in terms of right-of-way acquisition and, potential for change in LOS standards. So next slide. So the process that we've gone through is multi-tiered. We started looking at all of the regional plan scenarios and these siloed applications. So, we did a no build, but then partial widening, only part of the length, full widening, only applying bike ped and transit projects and connectivity projects. After assessing with the PAG, Project Advisory Committee, group, I should mention, after assessing the effects of each of those, we combined them into 2 solutions. One focusing on multimodal, so and the other focusing on highway. So it's basically the highway solution was full widening with the separated bike lanes, which are recommended in the ATMP. And those bike lanes, we actually looked at extending those all the way to Reardon, which right now they stop at Woodlands Village. And then the multimodal solution is really combining the partial ped bike and transit and connectivity solutions. We ran those through the regional model, and see on the right is criteria screening and scoring, many of the outputs coming from the model, but also some GIS or proximity analysis. After looking at the results of those, we found some things that really felt out of scope. The connectivity to the west, there was a number of crossroads, local roads, collector roads in the Kit Carson, Woody Mountain campground area that we assessed. Really, we don't have the regulations in place to really make those things happen, so we felt those were out of scope. And then for the solution 2, as we looked more closely at the separated bike lanes, particularly as we got to the east towards Reardon, right-of-way and historic structure constraints really kind of eliminated those. So we created these new hybrid solutions and ran those through the same scoring. The scoring got a little more sophisticated as we went on. We're bringing in, before at earlier levels, we're just looking at lane miles for cost. And now we're actually doing some planning level cost estimate using ADOT C2 engine, estimated engineering construction cost, E2C2, and some more recent city projects to come up with some costing and folding that into the evaluation. And then we'll be taking some of those for after discussion with the PAG into micro simulation with NAU. And then from that evaluation, we'll come up with our project recommendations. So next slide. So just a real quick description. I think I've hit on most of those. Actually, I did hit on all of those. So next slide, please. Here's kind of a cheat sheet in terms of the corridor evaluation criteria that was developed. Mandia, who's the project manager on this, went through numerous city, county, ADOT policy documents and said, hey, they kind of, and then we went through an exercise with the PAG, said, hey, they kind of fall into these 4 broad categories. And then underneath each of these are these different elements, which have specific measures coming out of the, like I said, the traffic model and other things. And then you can see through an exercise with the PAG and some public outreach, the weights that have been applied. Next slide, please. Boy, this is harder to see than I thought. But you can at least hopefully see the colors. And I apologize where the colors on the map don't match the colors on the key. That's a particular weakness of mine. Solution one, which is the multimodal solution, is on the left. And this is the volume level of service outputs from the model. Solution two is on the right. What you can see on the left, as you get towards, that's Woody Mountain on the far left, things start getting very colorful as we fall below level of service, acceptable levels of service. You can see to the far right, east of Woodlands Village, things are more or less the same, although one of the things as we look at widening without the connectivity, you get increased volume on West 66 and you actually see some of the level of service decreasing there west of Woodlands Village. On the left, you can kind of see there's a parallel line south of West 66. That's part of the connectivity that was modeled. And there's about 2,500 cars on that daily. Go to the next slide, please. I'll back up a little bit. As part of that first tier analysis, we looked at all of these scenarios from the regional plan. The idea there was that we really didn't know the future of the regional plan when we started. Was underway, and we wanted to find a corridor solution that was reasonable for as many possible futures as were out there, at least anticipated or being evaluated. And, you know, the regional plan process went on. The scenario E, hence the E and E plus, became the preferred scenario. And as we looked at the effects of those land uses, we really felt that we saw a lot of convergence. And what the PAG recommended from a kind of a sensitivity testing was, let's look at the worst scenario in terms of level of growth and apply that growth level to scenario E. And the direction was to put a significant amount of that growth in that area I referenced earlier, the campgrounds on the front side. And so that's what E plus is. And now we see these same solutions, 1 and 2, being modeled. And a couple interesting things happen. The number that you can't see on that collector road south of West 66, it almost doubles from what it was before. So we see increased usage of this connectivity system. And we still see a lot of color at that west end of 66 approaching Woody Mountain. But if you look at the segment between, I think that's Dunham and Woodlands Village, it actually performs better in solution 1 than solution 2. And that's where that connectivity system actually helps divert some of the traffic and keep you just under that's level of service E and keeps you in level of service D. If you look to the east of Woodlands Village, everything goes, is that purple? Pink? Bad. And they're kind of equally bad. You just really have no more capacity there. And I will point out in the top right corner, that black slash is the section of Milton between Butler and 66. And that is what we call LOSG. We created that just to show that it's well beyond LOSF. LOSF is when you're at full capacity, 1 above 1. And this is, I think, more than 10% over capacity. And so really what happens in those situations is you start seeing peak spreading, and the model hopefully represents where we can push traffic to other parts of the system. Anyway, there's the model results as it comes out of there. Next slide, please. So as described, we then said, okay, connectivity is out. I will say part of the connectivity that also went out, we were looking at some additional connections for ped and bike. But we, in setting up our kind of charter of this project, said we really want to limit right-of-way takes, and some of those additional connections required right-of-way takes. So what we're seeing here is as we eliminate these things, the two solutions really start looking an awful lot alike. So we still have the full widening from Woodlands Village to Woody Mountain and Hybrid 2. We have partial widening only to Dunham in Hybrid 1. But when it comes to ped and bike, we are now proposing a foot trail for Hybrid 1 on the south side of 66, and that's the reference to the SGP, the Strategic Grants Program. And as far as the model goes, and I think in a lot of practical usage, it's very similar in performance to separated bike lanes. And so the results start converging as well. So next slide, please. I mentioned these tier 1 conclusions. What we found is that there's nominal differences by land use to the different siloed applications. And I mentioned, we felt we could bring those down to really just look at the preferred scenario. As far as the siloed applications, we saw that the full length was most effective, and that these other applications, connectivity, ped bike transit, and the partial widening was modestly impactful. So then we combined those, next slide, and looked at solution 2. We were able to bring cost into this. And when we look at the cost of those proposed local roads, I mean, that's a considerable amount of new lane miles. When we add those in to that criteria matrix, the two solutions perform about the same. You can see it's like the table is maybe a little hard to read, but it's 100 points to 98 points. When we take that cost out, if there were regulations requiring them, it would be largely borne by the private sector. That score goes from 100 to 89. So it's not insignificant. And not surprisingly, the scenario with the connectivity performs better on ped bike and transit. There's more facilities in proximity to vacant parcels and in proximity to affordable housing in these equity areas, just because there's more facilities spread out more. And then on level of service, scenario 2 or solution 2 performs better. An interesting thing though, and we kind of discussed that on that level of service map, this connectivity solution seems to be more resilient and as in response to growth, where we're still seeing that 100 to 95 score there. And that would, again, expand if we were to take the local cost out. So next slide, please. So some of the things that we see, land use qualities, density, mix, and distance apart really kind of diminishes the impact of those mode shift investments. We really didn't see dramatic changes in mode share. The equity question, in some ways, it seems it's as much about providing a mode choice at all, because there's a lot of significant gaps in the system today, as much as it is providing mobility to some of these key groups. And we're seeing, and we'll discuss this a little bit more, that phasing could drive behaviors in terms of what you build first and the choices people have. as well as maybe by time, if the city is interested in adopting connectivity standards. And those standards, we think, could defer or avoid additional widening. I think to avoid widening, you'd have to look at changing LOS standards, either by ADOT or by, the city taking these on. For those who remember an effort on North 4th Street, looking at a road, road diet. Road diet reduces lanes, lane diet reduces widths, right? Is it the other way around? Anyway, it's a diet of types. The discussion was that in the experience in Seattle and Oregon, you could apply going from 4 lanes to 3 lanes on roads in volumes of 20 to 25,000 ADT. It was very hard to see the numbers on the screen, but that far west end of 66 on the screen was in that range, that distance between basically Thompson to Woody Mountain. Now, I bring that up, it would not meet ADOT's level of service standard D. But in terms of where things are with carbon neutrality and some of the attitudes or positions by city council, might be something for consideration. So next slide, please. As we looked into the hybrid solution, we still see hybrid 1, kind of a multimodal solution, outperforming hybrid 2, and a lot of that's due to cost. All that connectivity cost went away. So it's very similar to the score that you saw previously with the plus, the E plus. And then we start seeing, some kind of give and take across these policies, broad policies. Hybrid 1 was safety and environment, but now hybrid 2 actually is better on enhancing development because we've eliminated all that connectivity. Operations, safety, and accessibility seem to work better under hybrid 1, but that kind of overall mobility by our metrics for hybrid 2. Cost, as I mentioned, hybrid 1, but 419 eligibility, enhancing development for hybrid 2. And then things that were more or less equal, again, these solutions start looking very similar: equity, greenhouse gases, and complete streets. Next slide. So where are we moving as we're wrapping up our analysis and starting into the project selection? And this is where we're really going to start looking at implementation and constructability matters. Do our cross sections fit within the right of way? We'll do some field review, talk with engineers about some of these things, refine our cost assessments, and then look at whether we can retain ability over implementation over time to expand the roadway and perhaps transition interim facilities. So next slide. So we are not engineers. We do not have access to AutoCAD, but we're doing our best to illustrate for the PAG and you all how these things might work. So in places where either right of way is narrow or we see kind of cross slope or cross sectional issues, we're pulling these off the 2-foot contour and then doing our best to scale what's the street plan, I think is the software that we use to produce these things. So we want to illustrate that we're meeting basis of design report and hopefully being able to see where things fit on the slope and within the right of way. So you can see in the top right of way, we're using 79 feet of a 129-foot right of way at this particular location. Next slide, please. And in places it gets really tight, where we're using 106 feet of 106 feet. So, we'll, be doing some investigation and likely for constructability, we'll have to talk about things like temporary construction easements and other things in these locations, but kind of technically they fit. So next slide.
Dave, real fast on those.
Yeah.
Everywhere else on Route 66, a two-way left turn lane's 10 feet wide, and same with on Milton.
Okay, excellent, thank you. That buys us a little room. Probably still needed TCE, but
Right.
but that's a good note. Thank you.
When ADOT just repaved Milton a couple years ago, we had to, or we changed the width from 11 or 12 feet lane width to 11 feet lane width, and two-way left turn lane from 12 to 10, and we had to get the variance for that as well.
Okay. So I think the basis of design still calls for 12, and so that what we can note, I think that's a good note to add that variances are possible. So we have a PAG meeting next week on the 28th. The things that we want to discuss. Because things have converged in terms of the types of solutions, I think we can adjust our scope with NAU in terms of what they actually do microsimulation for. And we want, and just heard from them that they believe they can actually start analyzing the kind of delay level of service performance of some intersection types, various intersections. So we'll want to look at that. We want to investigate some of the phasing potential. ADOT has a pavement preservation project that's coming to construction in 2027. We have a meeting tomorrow with MetroPlan and some city staff to introduce the project and talk about some possibilities of maybe cost sharing or achieving some objectives. As I mentioned, at the cross sections, we want to look at, are we fitting in the right of way? Are there grade issues that we think are manageable? And then ownership and maintenance responsibilities. ADOT policy requires any bicycle facilities within the right of way to be maintained by the local jurisdiction. And so in the case of a foot trail or separated bike lanes or even on-street bike lanes, those would fall to the local jurisdiction to maintain. Kind of current practice is to stripe shoulders, which are kind of ADOT standard, but then to put in the skip striping and things that you would see associated with the bike lane, but no pavement markings or signing. Overall costs, we'll introduce some of those as well as project level costs. And another point of discussion is those kind of what the budget is, if you will, for 419 funding and the requirements. So our next steps, I think, is the next slide. Wrap up our cost analysis. We've done our safety analysis using the federal SPICE tool. As I mentioned, NAU, we're going to modify our scope to get them to do some intersection analysis. We do want to look at the bicycle comfort index a little more closely. There's some solutions proposed in the ATMP, and we can take our model results and maybe get a little tighter on what we think those implications of those would be, in case people want to consider those. And then this idea of this transitional facility types. One of the things we're looking at is building a foot trail to 11 feet so that as time goes on, it could be converted to a separated bike lane of the 5 and 6 foot. I think that's 6 foot sidewalk, 5 foot bike lane, as the complementary facility on the opposite side is built. And material types and development agreements and other things could come into play in those transitions. We do want to look at some bicycle accessibility using NAU's crank tool. TAC. Crank stands for? Yeah, never mind. It's a really, creative acronym that basically, I think the A is accessibility.
Cyclist routing accessibility network connection. I don't know, something like that.
It's a really cool tool. If you've not seen it, we'll send out the link to it. It's really, Stephen Gerke had a hand in development. It's like, you can click on it, see what jobs are available for different stress level cyclists. By, And I want to explain it. I'm sorry, we don't have time.
Jobs available
Yeah,
for
So look
cyclists?
at, so from any point, the road network is scored by its stress level.
Okay, thank you.
And if you are a low stress type cyclist, you will have fewer jobs available to you from that point via the network than
So you,
if you're a high stress cyclist.
okay,
And there's some other aspects of this tool that will be very useful for, I think, bicycle planning. And we just learned that a grant, we were awarded a grant, or the NAU was awarded a grant some time ago, and we've just learned that it is in fact in process if some bureaucratic hurdles get removed. And then mention the maintenance responsibilities and discussions. With that. So hopefully that was a somewhat timely update. I think we're on schedule to wrap up by the end of this fiscal year. And so we'll be back to you in April and May with results from at least the next PAG meeting. So questions or comments?
Just have
Yeah.
a practical question. After this amazing study is completed and potential solutions
Mhm.
vetted with an implementation, do you have a sense of the next steps, which agency would pick up? Like, for example, if there's a series of projects in ADOT right away, does that have to get into ADOT's
P2P
local-
process, yeah.
And so in other words, timeline and potentially implementing any of these, are we talking 3 years out, 5 years out?
I think for any capital project, 5 is probably still pretty ambitious.
Okay.
I mean, even, so one of the things we'll be assessing at 66 and Thompson is intersection type. And if it's a roundabout, design and delivery on a roundabout, even with local funding, is probably about 5 years, I would guess. And if it's totally locally funded, it's probably got a fast track. If it meets ADOT's expectations.
So it'd basically the next step would be actually design of some portion of that
Yeah.
project, and it would have to be in an agency's capital plan, ideally in the next 3 years. I'm thinking back to the list that Sandra is tracking. Like some portion of design would ideally end up in this up to FY 28. And so I guess looking back at this list of, which again, I don't know if West Route 66, how it's folded into this, but that's a modernization project. So somehow ideally that modernization of West Route 66 design is in, I assume it would be in an ADOT list if it would get through their process. And I mean, I guess I'm just trying to understand how it can keep moving forward.
My understanding of the P2P process is it's where ADOT is spending its available funding. So I think it depends. If we're looking at city funding, then we're able to capture projects that are city funded. I don't think we have to get into that ADOT P2P list in the same way, or it might be more of a check
Okay.
box. If we are looking to partner with the city or with ADOT, then I think you do have to work through that P2P process. And I will point out to this TAC group, I don't think that there is enough money in 419 to do all the things that Dave recommended. And I do think that's something for this TAC to be paying attention to is, again, what are the priorities or how do we phase it if we're only looking at 419? Or is this something where we're saying this is our number, if we only can get one thing out of ADOT, is this our number one ask of ADOT, or do we have other priorities? And then I think I also just want to, ask the TAC that as we're moving through these last pieces, I will say, I have a little trepidation with the recommendations going towards council because I have watched other projects of a widening nature go to council and not be received well. And I don't want us to end up in that position with these recommendations. So as a TAC, as our body, definitely seeking your advice and input on how we present this to council or bring it to council if that is our ultimate recommendation.
Madam Chair, if I could follow up on that, I think a key piece of information, been having a lot of conversation with Steph Santana about the section between Woodlands Village and Thompson. And the fact that either construction, development agreements that are completed or development agreements that are fairly far along, the widening will be complete in that section. And so, the council has been involved in various ways in kind of all of those decisions. And so feel that hybrid one by saying, okay, after Thompson, we can taper down and continue on, would represent this kind of non-widening position. I don't know what their attitude or position might be towards that section and the ongoing or existing processes. But that might be something, again, just want to alert. I think Kate's right in alerting you to some of the things we've heard and as we get closer to this, bringing recommendations forward, what that might mean. I think that also has implications for this possible collaboration. If we do with ADOT on the pavement preservation project, if private development is going to be essentially repaving Woodlands to 66, and I'm overstating that, and potentially there's an intersection project that the city is participating in, can some of that funding be deferred and put into a more significant capital project? Those are some of the opportunities I think that may be out there, and hopefully we'll discuss more in detail tomorrow. But Anne, I think you're right, asking the right questions. What's next? And it is to get these things into the appropriate CIP projects, and if there are partnerships, to get the appropriate agreements in place. So.
And did I hear you say that you are going to ask council to adopt this or just approve it?
Well, ultimately, council, hopefully we're delivering a useful plan. That's our end goal here. And so ultimately it would be, looking to the city to say, how do you want to bring this forward to council to bring it to the next steps? So being that it's 419 money, I think it's got to go back to them.
I'm just thinking more from that kind of age-old question like we have with Milton, like how do we apply it to private development?
Yeah.
And we could, it's absolutely possible to bring it forward for formal adoption, or if it's just a budget request for the next stage, I think we'd kind of look to you all to say, what do you want?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think there's a parallel here, Madam Chair, to ADOT's Milton study, in that we've done a study, we think these things will work. It's not adopted by the city. This is another ADOT highway.
Yeah.
Right? So if ADOT is comfortable with the recommendations and the city, likes the priorities or doesn't like the priorities, they'd say they would shift it some other way. They can say, well, here's the findings from MetroPlan. Here's what we would recommend, because at some point you do need to program your 419 funds for West 66. But we recognize it's ADOT's road, city's money. This is just our technical analysis to help you guys reach that decision.
And just to add, we didn't have that full P2P list, but there is a portion that's on there that includes that widening West Street 66. It is not, it didn't make it into the top, 14, 15 scoring, but it is on there. ADOT doesn't consider anything under a mile to be an expansion, so it falls into that modernization category.
Any other questions or comments on this? And I just want to know we will be kicked out of that 3:30.
I think we're 5 minutes away.
Okay, perfect. So we have the MetroPlan, last item, item 8, MetroPlan happenings.
Great. So this is just a reminder. This is our updates about what's gone on over the last couple of months, in addition to the 3 bullet briefings that hopefully you're getting and are keeping you updated along the way. We are doing a legislative trip next week with Member Vasquez down to the Capitol to talk about the TAC projects and recapitalizing the Arizona Smart Fund. I know we've had some recent awards to the city. There's not enough money in that pot to award match for grants that have already been received. So that, it would be a big win to get more money back into the SMART Fund in addition to people's individual RTAC projects. For your RTAC projects, if you want those to be successful, you've got to be down at the Capitol finding a member who's going to push them through. If you're not, they're not going to happen. Lighting standards, we did hear back from ADOT about our request to modify lighting standards to match the city's standard, the city's less restrictive standard. ADOT said that they want to study that before they move forward with that recommendation. We've asked for some clarification on what is involved in a study and who should be involved, and is that funded, or do we need to advocate for funding for that study? So we're waiting to hear back on that information. We did update the public participation plan. We had a couple of minor substantive amendments to it, the ability for staff to make some minor amendments without going back to the board every time when staff change or we find errors or we need to update demographics, that we can do that without going back to the board. I mean, that we would bring a formal review back every 2 years. Micromobility share study is going to council on February 11th. Kim is leading that effort in collaboration with Mountain Lion and city staff. It's kind of a white paper on what's happening. Our portion is kind of a white paper on what's happening within the micromobility share world. And the map on the screen is all the places in North America with micromobility share programs. And then finally, we've been doing business manager interviews, and we're hopeful that we have someone on board and can get your calendars straightened out soon. Thanks for bearing with us while I avoid doing all the calendars myself. Dave, yes.
Would add one more thing to a happening. It's an ADOT study. There's a pot of funding for freight corridors. The past legislation expanded the miles, potential miles for freight corridors. Currently, we don't have any urban or rural freight corridors, priority freight corridors in our region. So this would be an opportunity, and they are looking to have a meeting with the local brain trust on freight. So look for an invitation. Thank you.
My final recommendation to the group would be to obligate any grants you can as soon as you can, and we'll see what happens. So that's it. That's
It's a lot happening.
Yeah.
Great job, you guys. Okay, we are going to move on to closing business. Any items from the TAC? Welcome back in.
Thank you.
Okay. We are going to adjourn at 3:22 p.m.
Thank you.
Of your life.
Respond to your email, but yes, I'll give a presentation.
Okay, yeah.
Yes.